So Major League Soccer now more than ever needs that 2022 TV deal to be as big as ever. You're listening to the World Soccer Talk podcast, the only podcast about watching soccer on TV and online. Welcome to episode 169. Coming up on this week's show, our thoughts on the movie about the Adidas Puma sneaker wars, latest news on rumors that ESPN are interested in the Korean League, how soccer eSports are not ready for primetime television, plus we have letters from you, the listeners, in our mailbag section. I'm Christopher Harris, aka The Gaffer, joined alongside my co-host Kartik Krishnaya. And let's dive in, Kartik, to the topic, the big topic, which is when will these leagues return? And I know initially, and this is a day-by-day experience. You think it's coming back, and then the next day, a government minister or something says no, it's not going to be ready yet. Or it is very frustrating experience because it is one of those things that it seems to be on again, off again situation in terms of when the leagues are coming back, no matter which league you're talking about from around the world. But for example, the Premier League, I think the Premier League in many ways is waiting for the Bundesliga. The Bundesliga, originally there was talks about maybe May 8th for the return.
Yeah.
And actually I think it was Ian Joy. Ian Joy spoke to somebody within I think one of the coaches, and that coach said, no way. There's no way possibility that's going to happen. Maybe the week after, maybe middle May, perhaps. The Premier League actually, as of recording this today, Thursday, Gary Neville tweeted something out saying that behind the scenes, he's heard that June 8th is the return date, but nobody wants to come out and say that. I think part of the issue, Kartik, is that everyone's waiting for the first league to go ahead and launch. And then they get all the negative publicity. There will be negative publicity from this. And then the other leagues will jump in and start playing. I think it's almost a waiting game. Who goes first? And who goes through the issues which are bound to occur, and how are they handled?
Yeah, I think that's certainly the case. Germany is in better shape, at least when you look at statistics and numbers, than the rest of Western Europe and certainly the United States. So I would put the U.S., Italy, Spain, UK, France, the Netherlands all in kind of one box. Portugal also in that box, and then Germany in another when we're making these determinations. Germany, however, does not want to risk that good work, and the fact that they've had a very science-driven approach, and for whatever reason, maybe I credit public policy, maybe other people think it's just dumb luck, but they have avoided the sort of a pandemic nature that we've seen in Italy, and we've seen in Spain, and we've seen in the United States, and then I think quite frankly, we're seeing in the UK now also. They've kind of avoided that. So I guess I'm of two minds here. I'm thinking, well, the Bundesliga could probably restart, and I'm not confident. I've actually gone on record now saying I don't think sports in the U.S. really will kick back off till November. That shocked a lot of people, but that's kind of what I'm hearing behind the scenes. I'm hearing part of my sourcing is people who work in college athletic departments who are telling me for college soccer and college football, for the fall sports, we're looking at November. Mm-hmm. And for college basketball, we're looking at potentially canceling the non-conference season and just having teams play in their league, which would be different. It would be that every college basketball team would have only their league games and not their non-league games. So there would be no Kentucky versus Louisville game, for example, no Florida versus Florida State, right? Because there are different leagues. Would be very much like if you envisioned European football without the Champions League. That's what it would be like. And then that way they can shorten the college basketball season, maybe start it in January rather than start it in November. So these are all theories, contingencies, everything changes every week. So I don't want people to think, oh my gosh, college basketball is not starting until January. But that's the kind of baseline under which people are talking, the premises people are talking about in the United States. And then I think when you're looking at European football, we're going to talk a little bit later about leagues that have already decided to throw in the towel. This complicates the Champions League scenario, right? Because if some leagues are playing and some leagues aren't. I saw a New York Times article last week about, we had speculated about this. I think we maybe even speculated about this on this podcast about the Atalanta-Valencia tie in Champions League. And did that tie have an impact in spreading the virus? Now, the Times article focused on the first leg in Italy. I had actually focused on the second leg, which was the closed-door match played at Valencia,
right,
the day of the shutdown. Right, it was, I think, played simultaneously with the Liverpool Atletico Madrid game, or not the day of the shutdown. The next day was the day of the shutdown, right, when Wolves played Olympiacos. But the last day of Champions League, I'd speculated about that because several Valencia players tested positive within a week of that match, and of staff at Valencia. Now the New York Times is saying, well, actually the first leg was responsible for the community spread.
Right.
Because of all Atalanta having however many tens of thousands of fans at the Champions League match. So I think UEFA now is concerned about that sort of thing happening again. And I have to say, quite frankly, and this is I have to throw this out, and I don't know what the liability and insurance situation is like in European football. I will admit I'm pretty ignorant about that. I know what it's like in U.S. sports. Liability issues are massive. Getting insurance for players is difficult for minor leagues and in normal circumstances. For major leagues, they get these packages, but there's all kinds of things in it, right? Because you have strong players unions. That's another reason you're not going to see a match for a long time, because one player who tests, we hear about this testing regime, one player who tests negative before a match, let's say it's an MLS match, trots out, plays the match, plays physically, plays the game the way the game is normally played, which I'm not sure players are going to want to do. That's another thing. Sports may not look the same. There may not be as much physicality in soccer and basketball and these sports, these team sports, and then test positive a couple of days later. What do you think is going to happen?
Right, right. All those players will have to be tested. There's going to be,
and there's going to be lawsuits.
Right. I mean, that's part of it, though, too, Kartik, is I think a lot of it, in terms of when these leagues will return, is based on the political system in place. So, for example, the Bundesliga, as far as I know, I think in Germany, I think there's very much a kind of a regional government system too, where, say, Bavaria, the minister in Bavaria might have...
Yeah, they're very decentralized in Germany.
Yeah.
Compared to the UK, it's diametrically the opposite.
Right.
Basically.
And then you look at the UK. So if Boris Johnson says, okay, yes, sporting events can go ahead just with precautions, then that's a blanket basically rule or law
that goes into place. Burnham in that situation, the mayor of Manchester can do about it, right? I mean,
right. Exactly. Yeah. Now, compare that to the United States, which is, again, very decentralized in terms of states having a lot more power and cities and counties having a lot more power. So, for example, Los Angeles, I think the mayor in LA a couple of weeks ago said there's going to be no sporting events until next year. Toronto, you're dealing now in Major League Soccer with teams outside of the United States, in Canada. Toronto saying, okay, no sports for the foreseeable future. I think the United States has a much tougher, MLS has a much tougher obstacle in its place in terms of having to work with all of these different teams in different cities, different states, different countries to go ahead and get it back, the game being played again. I mean, the ideas that have been thrown out there too, as far as having MLS teams go into, say, it's, I don't know, Florida, for example, Orlando, and taking the teams and having them based there, based in hotels, and then trying to control that environment as best as possible. And then you have the teams from Toronto and Vancouver and Montreal and the rest of the MLS clubs, maybe in that region, and then some of the others in going to, say, Arizona or Phoenix or something like that, having games there. That's a possibility, and I think that's more likely with Major League Soccer rather than, say, with the Premier League. The Premier League could say, okay, June 8th, we're rolling out the games, it's going to be behind closed doors. The games are going to be played in the Midlands area, from stadiums like Wolves, Aston Villa, Leicester. I mean, kind of teams in that area. And again, applying the same philosophy, but that would be much easier for the Premier League. And that actually would be much easier for MLS if they can make it happen. But again, I think everyone is waiting to see what happens with the Bundesliga. Then Bundesliga seems to be the one that has the opportunity to kind of go launch this, and then everyone's going to look at that and see what works, what doesn't work, and can this does this now mean that the Bundesliga takes the heat, and now the Premier League and other leagues come in and say, okay, all right, now they did it, so we're going to go ahead and do it and get less PR flack.
Yeah, I guess that's the thought process among the people in the Premier League, is that they want to see if the Bundesliga can take the bullets, and then they have that defense mechanism. Although I think there's going to be criticism regardless when they start, if they start. But yes, you're right about the governmental systems being completely different. And in the UK, the Westminster has the ultimate authority, and they can give the direction. Andy Burnham, who I mentioned, by the way, who is the mayor of Manchester, is a lifelong Everton fan, so little irony there, but and a huge football fan, by the way, and a guy that did a lot of good work on pushing Hillsborough Commission and making sure the government that had been so unresponsive and insensitive to the victims of the Hillsborough disaster, and Liverpool fans in general, really kind of reversed their thinking when he was when Labour was in power and he was in a Labour government. But this is the cross-border thing makes MLS particularly vulnerable, and I don't know how many times we've had this conversation about the difficulty of operating cross-border leagues. And I will admit, prior to me working at NASL, I didn't see the issue, and so maybe you have to be in the trenches. And I used to think, it'd be great if we had a combined U.S.-Canada league. I even had, before I realized the difficulty of it, had advocated the NASL having 8 teams in Canada, things like ridiculous ideas like that. All the cities that have CanPL teams now. That's another league in serious jeopardy, by the way, who had such a great first season. Have all those cities have NASL teams. It is a very difficult thing, and I think now that you just have to assume official government policy in Canada will not mirror that of the U.S. There will be some differences, some nuances. It makes MLS's restart very difficult. The concept of Arizona and Florida is something Major League Baseball is looking at also. I'm not sure how practical it is. For baseball, there are baseball stadiums everywhere in Arizona and Florida, because they're spring training stadiums where teams can play. I'm not sure about soccer facilities in Arizona and Florida. I could probably think off the top of my head. There are a fair number that you could play at. If you're playing close doors, then you could play anywhere. Well, yeah, right?
you could play at Disney Wide World of Sports in Kissimmee there in Florida. There's got 25 different fields. If it's behind closed doors.
Yeah, you could play at the Florida Soccer Association headquarters in Auburndale, which is actually right near a lot of the baseball spring training facilities in Polk County. That's a beautiful facility. Yeah. Obviously, Lockhart and Orlando City Stadium could be used, and so could presumably stadiums on college campuses, although that's a whole nother issue. Maybe you don't even want to go there. But so you could use the UCF stadium, you could use the FAU and FIU stadiums. But it's still, I think it's a long way off.
Yeah.
And so if we're talking about something this massive logistically, and people are still thinking, July or August for MLS, I think that's very unrealistic.
Well, the other thing that is not in the favor of Major League Soccer is that the season had just started. You mean so for the Premier League or the Bundesliga, and they're looking at what 8 games or so left per team, roughly. I mean, that's something that's doable in terms of playing those behind closed doors and figuring out a way to, play 2 games a week and within a certain environment. That's possible. You've got Major League Soccer clubs that are, some of them haven't even played a home game yet. You look at Inter Miami. Inter Miami has played 0 home games. They've played 2 away games. There's been, 15,000 people that have bought season tickets, averaging maybe, $800 each. So the amount of revenue that's come in from the ticket sale revenue is probably in the millions of dollars, and you mean all those customers, all those season ticket holders have seen 0 games. So if you look at Major League Soccer and you say, okay, well, maybe November is more of a realistic coming back point. At that point, you go, well, what's the point of even playing the season? Usually the season is over by early December, sometimes late November. Let's just go ahead and cancel the whole season and start again next year, and then maybe just roll those season tickets over until next season. And then from the TV deal, maybe work out a deal with ESPN and Univision and Fox and say, hey, I mean, that's the sticking point, though. I mean, what do you do? I mean, because you're coming up to 2022 is the last year of the TV deal. It's hard to throw in anything extra there if you're going to cancel the whole season. Maybe you give them a refund, which is going to cost, in the tens of millions of dollars, if not more. That's a huge issue. So Major League Soccer, if anything, I know there's been a couple of stories in the press this last week or two saying about Major League Soccer's position well to be in the situation in terms of having a single entity, not having much in terms of players' wages, and having a lot of, the single entity allows for cost cutting easier than say club by club basis. Where they're overspending on transfers, etc. Yes, there are some advantages to Major League Soccer, but I see more disadvantages to that league in the situation they're in, just because the season has practically not even started, really. All right, Kartik, in terms of these games that will definitely be played behind closed doors to start off with, this segues into one of the films I watched this week, which I finished watching it, the documentary called American Pharaoh, about Bob Bradley and his time as the manager of the Egyptian national team back in 2014, trying to get them to qualify for the World Cup. It's not a new documentary by any means, but I finally got around to watching it. But the thing that stood out to me was a quote that Bob Bradley said in this documentary. And he was talking about after the Port Said massacre, where the Egyptian national team wasn't allowed to play in front of any fans for a period of about, I think, 1 to 2 years. And the quotes he gave, talking about playing in front of an empty stadium, is that the game without fans has no soul. And that's something that I've been preaching for a couple of months now, saying in terms of these games are being played behind closed doors. Yes, it's soccer. Yes, the players are going at it as much as possible. But without the fans, it's a completely different experience. It's a completely different feeling. I'm sure for the players as much for the TV viewer. It's a completely different game. So that's a great quote from Bob Bradley. The game without fans has no soul. Kartik, did you get a chance to watch the Adidas Puma film about? It's called the Brothers Feud. That's on Amazon Prime right now. The story, I think it's partly based on the true story. I don't think it's 100% factual, but Adidas versus Puma, the Brothers Feud.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the scene at the train station when one of the brothers is going to Nuremberg and gets punched and he's trying to impress some women or gets beaten up. I don't think that's probably factual, but yeah, there was a lot in it. Yes, I did finish it. I did complete it. It's just it was really well done. It's in German. You can subtitle it in English. I think it was very revealing to me how these two brothers were eventually torn apart by kind of ambition, politics, and quite frankly, a little bit of a different business philosophy. And I did not, I guess, realize, and I don't know why I didn't know this, that they were based earshot from one another. They were from the same town, obviously, Puma and Adidas originally. And what's interesting is Puma came out of the gates after the split very, very aggressively, right? And got a lot of deals. And we think of Adidas now as the more successful, the more the much larger presence. Although Puma, I think, is that kind of third wheel. There's a bit of an Adidas Nike duopoly, and then but then Puma has, I think, a clear presence as the third big apparel and shoe manufacturer ahead of all of the Italian brands and New Balance and some of the American brands, Converse, etc. So I think that's interesting. I also think this brought back a memory for us that footballers, soccer players, at one time it was thought they could wear regular footwear and play their game. And that these two brothers both realized they needed specialized equipment. And we forget that for the first decades, or even longer maybe, that football was played, there was no specific specialized equipment, particularly in terms of footwear, for the sport. And so I highly recommend this. I think folks should watch this.
Yeah, it's so they're still both based in the same town. So Adidas and Puma, based in the town. The population of the town as of 2018 is 23,000 people. So at the time of the formation of Adidas and Puma, which would have been in Adidas would have been 1930s. It was probably a village at that point.
Would have been like 47, I think, right?
Yeah, so it was probably a village at that point, and so that and they're still both based. I mean, huge international brands based in that town. And the funny thing too, Kartik, is that in that small town there are two clubs. There's two amateur clubs. One of the clubs is supported by Adidas, and whereas Adidas kit and footwear, and then the other club in this small tiny little town is Puma. Both are supported by and that's supported by Puma. So even from the 1930s to 2020, that animosity, that competition is still on, even down to the amateur level between those two international brands. But yeah, it's highly recommended. I'm sure it's a little bit sensationalized, but also, I mean, the miracle of Bern, the World Cup final, where you have Germany trying to win the World Cup, and the head of Puma kind of really casting doubts in terms of their chances of winning the World Cup. That was the way that final was reenacted. I thought it was really, really well done with the fans in the stadium. That alone, from a soccer aspect, was well worth watching.
Oh yeah. And it reminded me. Remember, you and I went to Dortmund to the German Football Museum a few years ago, and even the model they had on display of that final was just captivating. And then this took it. The end of this film, the scenes towards the end of this film of that '54 final in Switzerland, just took it to a whole nother level. And that was a decisive moment in football history, because at the time, I think most of our listeners know this, but at the time, Hungary was the gold standard, right? And there was no thought about them getting beat. And I have to reread. We did our YouTube yesterday on books. I have to reread the chapter in Jonathan Wilson's book. Jonathan Wilson is an expert on Eastern European football, about that final or the culmination of that chapter where he talks about that final, because it was something very unique Germany did tactically, and it's just I'm blanking out on it, and maybe our listeners know exactly what I'm talking about, to beat that Hungarian team, because Hungary was Bela Gutmann and Puskás era. They were unbeatable. They wouldn't just win matches 1-0, by the way. They'd win matches 6-0 or 6-2, and they were. It's funny because we judge these greatest teams of all time based on who wins World Cups and who doesn't, and at the international level. And that's sometimes unfortunate, because it seems this Hungarian team had a greater impact on football, and the way football is played, maybe, than most World Cup winners, and the window in which they were dominating, which ended in '54, but really ended in '56 with the Hungarian Revolution, but ran from maybe 49-50 to 54 56. They were as good as any team in the history of the sport at the international level.
So in addition to that, this week I watched the final. Actually, it wasn't even the final. I think it was the semi-final of the EPL Invitational, which was a FIFA 20 tournament put on by the Premier League. All the games were streamed live on the Premier League social channels, digital channels, and as well as on the weekend, NBCSN had it, and then Telemundo Deportes, I think digital side had it too. And the semi-final I watched was Raheem Sterling against Trent Alexander-Arnold. So you had Manchester City against Liverpool, and what could have been and what should have been a really fantastic game to watch. Both Raheem and Trent you had the cameras on them. They were mic'd up so you could hear what they were saying. And yet again, and I've seen this from now, I've watched the Liga MX, E-Liga MX, I've watched MLS, I've watched La Liga, I've watched the Premier League, and none of the FIFA 20 coverage I've seen on live television so far has perfected it, and every single time there's been issues. So with the Liverpool against Man City, Raheem against Trent, the game was laggy. It's typical FIFA 20 servers. They kept on pausing at inopportune times. Trent was attacking, and then all of a sudden it glitches, it pauses, and you can see on screen on the FIFA 20 kind of the error message, network connection issues. It pauses right as he's getting ready to take a shot. The commentators for the Premier League were poor. I'm not sure the names of them, but really, really poor commentary. And again, the games happen so quickly that the commentators always are trying to catch up. Like the halftime is like 5 seconds. As soon as the halftime, it's the end of the first half. Within 5 seconds, roughly, they're on again, playing the kickoff in the second half. That's the way FIFA 20 works. You just want to kind of get through that game as quickly as possible. You don't sit around for 15 minutes and talk about the game. So for the Premier League, I was surprised. Not a good production by any means. I also watched Sevilla against Villarreal. La Liga had a competition called La Liga Kick COVID, which was a fundraiser. You had Phil Shane commentating this game. This was on beIN Sports Connect, as well as the La Liga YouTube channel. Phil Shane commentating, and then Jimmy Conrad commentating. This one was better than most of the ones I've seen, but there was no crowd noise. There was no noise piped in from, when you hear in the crowd roaring on FIFA 20. So it sounded a little bit sterile. It was better with Phil commentating rather than, say, Stu Holden commentating the MLS games. You have a real commentator commentating the games, and Jimmy Conrad was okay. But again, not perfected by any means, and really, I don't think that FIFA 20 is ready for prime time. This is nothing compared to iRacing on Fox, where you have the NASCAR racing, which looks absolutely incredible. The FIFA 20, to me, the actual game engine itself does not look like it's advanced a lot. I haven't played FIFA much in the last, say, 5 years, but it hasn't really changed that much. It doesn't seem to have improved that much. I don't think FIFA 20 is ready for television. The sooner real soccer can come back, the better. The iRacing side, at least, that seems to be, I'm not even into racing, is a lot more entertaining than FIFA 20.
Yeah, similar experience. I watched the UEFA, the Champions League version of the FIFA E-Cup or whatever it was called on ESPN2. I believe it was Friday night. Jimmy Conrad hosted. A couple other guys whose names I don't recall were on the commentary. And in fact, interestingly enough, the Scandinavian teams made up the final four of the competition. So it didn't go quite according to the form it would go normally in a Champions League match. By the way, Trent Alexander-Arnold was representing Liverpool in that competition also, so he must be quite a prolific FIFA player. They sent him to both the Champions League and the Premier League, but same issues, laggy. I think the commentators are always catching up. There's this short halftime. There are seemingly the game, same thing. I haven't played FIFA and I think since FIFA 14, which was the game that came out in 2013. So I probably haven't played it since the end of that season, and the game doesn't seem terribly different to me. Honestly, it doesn't seem like there's anything new in it. Same experience. I watched this. It was I was compelled by the fact that the Scandinavian teams kept winning. That made it different than normal form. So that actually is probably what held my interest in this competition, not anything else. But FIFA 20 not ready for prime time. Obviously they didn't anticipate the shutdown, and the leagues that have done it, Liga MX, Premier League, UEFA, all of these leagues were not necessarily ready with a plan for this, and we realized the rush nature of it. But still, it's got a ways to go.
Yeah, and I think it's actually more so it's EA Sports and just the issues that they're dealing with the servers. You're having millions of people playing at the same time, playing against each other around the world, and those servers are not able to keep up with it. One more thing on this before we move on to the news is that with both Raheem and with Trent, no personality. They go. There's no interviewer really. There's no one there with a mic in kind of leading them along, or there's no PR person behind the scenes kind of giving them some advice. But when they go to these guys, when they go to Trent and Raheem and say, "Hey, what did you think of that?" It's just like flatline. It's just like no personality, no energy, no interest. They're just focused on playing the FIFA game. They just want to play that and have fun. And yes, it's cool to have Raheem and Trent mic'd up, but don't expect any really thoughtful response. They're athletes, and that's what they're. And on the FIFA side, I'm sure they play FIFA normally, even when it's not coronavirus, they play it all the time. But television-wise, it was not good television by any means. It just. I think it's the sooner that the FIFA 20 idea can be put in the bag and sent away and say, okay, we tried it didn't work, the better. All right, Kartik, so TV streaming news, and then we talked in the first segment about the issue that leagues are facing. Should they return? When will they return? Well, one league especially has made that decision.
Yeah, so Liga was canceled this week, which was a stunner to some people in France. The Eredivisie had already called their season, which might, I was talking about litigation in terms of player safety earlier, might result in litigation from a club or two who feels like they might have qualified for Europe if this hadn't happened. For UEFA, not UEFA Cup, my goodness, I'm dating myself, for Europa League. Superliga Argentina and Copa Argentina will end officially as well. So we're beginning to see leagues shift from this idea that, okay, we can indefinitely put off resumptions of the season to saying, okay, time's up. This puts, if Champions League were to restart, and I'm sorry, I'm ignorant of who's alive in Europa League. I'm sure there's probably a Dutch team alive, but specifically there are two French teams still alive in Champions League. Lyon, who lead the tie, going to a second leg with Juventus, and I think had a pretty good shot of hanging on. And then, although Juventus may not be in a position to play either, right? And then, of course, PSG, who have advanced to the quarterfinals. I think now you have to wonder if PSG and Lyon can even resume Champions League if they're not playing in any other competition, which is a pity because this is the year, obviously, PSG could have won the Champions League. I think Lyon has an interesting team and felt like they might be one of the sleepers in the tournament. I didn't think they'd win it, but I thought maybe they could get to the semifinals. But that now appears to be on the rocks. And quite honestly, this is France. Can Spanish teams, can Italian teams, can they resume?
Yep.
Are they in a position to resume? Atalanta, they're in the quarterfinals already. Can they resume? Napoli, I believe, is still – Napoli's still in the tournament. So maybe this is just going to give us some confirmation now, Chris, that Champions League isn't going to finish. Maybe that's the reality.
Yeah, and this is going back to what you said before, what I said before about MLS having a difficult time. UEFA has probably an even more difficult time. MLS is dealing with the Canadian government and the US government, and then in the different states and different cities and different counties, etc. UEFA is really dealing with all these different European countries. So, like you said, the French league is saying, okay, both Ligue 1 and Ligue 2 are cancelled, and the Dutch league has already ended, and there may be some of the other leagues too that are going to shut down, which is going to impact the Europa League, which is going to impact the Champions League, and UEFA, I know, have been pushing back a lot and saying, okay, well, no. you have to finish the leagues. But I think if anything happens, maybe some of the major leagues in Europe finish the seasons being played behind closed doors, and then the Champions League and the Europa League are impacted because not all of the clubs that are still in the tournament can actually can play. And that's again, we'll have to wait and see down the road to see what happens. But that's alarming news for UEFA. I'm sure that they're really, really freaking out about all of this. Moving on, next news item. This is something that I tweeted. So on World Soccer Talk this week, I tweeted that according to an article in Sports Pro, ESPN are reportedly in talks to acquire the US rights to the Korean or South Korean K-League ahead of the league's return on May 8th. And the thing about this, though, too, is that I just retweeted this news, and I looked into it a little bit more. And from what I can tell from my sources, that ESPN has not had any discussions with the rights holder, which I believe is Sports Radar, to the Korean K-League. So the news might be a little bit premature. That's not to say that ESPN may not be ESPN may or may not be interested in this. It looks like the K-League will be probably the first league to return in a massive capacity. I mean, you've got the Belarusian Premier League, you've got the Nicaraguan League, you've got a couple of other minor leagues around the world playing, but the Korean League could be coming to the United States to one of the broadcasters. And at the same time, though, too, that even if it is an ESPN Plus, or if it is a Bleacher Report Live, or whoever it may be, these games will be played in the middle of the night. You mean 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. So, yes, we're excited about any live, real soccer coming back. But I would hold off on the excitement for the time being until we know more details and see who picks up these rights, if anyone does. And in the last piece of news in this news segment is some sad news, and that is that former Manchester City and Liverpool footballer Michael Robinson died this week, age 61 years of age. The footballer had become a broadcasting legend in Spain, where he worked on La Liga broadcasts. For anyone who's watched coverage of La Liga from Spain or lived in Spain, Michael Robinson was one of the most respected and one of the most popular broadcasters in Spain. Michael Robinson, really, at the end of the day, is really more famous for being a La Liga sports commentator, analyst about La Liga. Really fell in love with the game when he moved from England to go play in Spain. I think Osasuna, but apparently his death this week was linked to cancer. So definitely rest in peace, Michael Robinson, a great footballer from the English First Division and La Liga broadcaster.
Yeah, Chris, this is a horrible, tragic loss. Michael Robinson he had melanoma. We knew that he had died. He had disclosed it on air sometime during, I want to say last season was this season, right? But before the break for COVID, he was seen as a mentor to Steve McManaman, both from a broadcasting standpoint. They both worked at Setanta together, and then also from a standpoint of kind of acclimating in Spanish culture when Macca went to Real Madrid. And Robinson had, of course, played for Osasuna after he'd played for Liverpool and Manchester City, just like Macca. Macca played for those two clubs also, and Brighton was where he was best known as a player. Just a phenomenal commentator. My orientation to him, I have to admit, was through Republic of Ireland matches. He called a lot of Republic of Ireland matches back in the day, and was a Republic of Ireland international. Quick tribute from Rafa Nadal, one of the great athletes of our generation. We woke up, and this is obviously just the other day, we woke up with the sad news of the death of one of our own. You were the one who always made us happy about the sport. We are grateful to you. So really fitting tribute from Rafa Nadal.
Yeah, and like I was saying to you just a minute ago, Kartik, that he was bigger as a La Liga analyst, commentator, presenter than he was as a footballer. I mean, I remember him playing for Liverpool mostly, but also Man City back in the day, back in the early 80s. But it's really kind of as a La Liga commentator, broadcaster talent is really where he was perhaps most well known. All right, Kartik, let's move on to listener mailbag. First up,
one last thing I should mention, was that when he moved to City, he was one of the largest transfers in history at that point. When he came from Preston, which is a nearby club, and Malcolm Allison overspent on him, quite frankly. And this is right after Man City had spent an exorbitant amount of money on Trevor Francis also. I think broke the transfer record at the time. So Robinson actually at one time was one of the maybe 5 biggest transfers in the history of English football, believe it or not.
Wow. All right, Lou Burns in the listener mailbag. He says, I rely on your reporting on what is going on in the US media as regards soccer coverage, and finding it strange that you haven't mentioned the apparent loss of Sky Sports News on NBCSN. Any comments? So, Lou, yeah, to me, this is not a big story just because of everything going on. If it was normal, where it was during the normal soccer season and games were being played and then Sky Sports had been dropped, then I would have done a story on it. I did do a tweet on it a few weeks ago, and what had happened was that NBCSN had increased the number of hours that Sky Sports News was being shown on NBCSN, I think from 1 hour to, I think, like 4 hours or 5 hours daily. And but there was nothing going on. There was no news to talk about. I mean, even for Sky Sports News, who loves to sensationalize news and talk about, take a small thing and blow it up, there was nothing to talk about. But the reality more so is that NBCSN a few weeks ago switched to more of a focus on American football. I think both college and NFL basically just talking about the games. And they've done that in the late mornings and early afternoons, having talking heads talk about American football. And I think that's where they're trying to focus on building or trying to keep some type of audience there hooked. Because, anyone knows in America, talk about NFL or college football, and those numbers usually would be pretty good. If you do Sky Sports News, where there's no news happening, those numbers are going to be pretty small. So, according to NBCSN, Sky Sports News will return. It's just right now, there's no point in really broadcasting it because there's nothing going on. Next up is John Average Geek. John says, I have watched Adidas versus the Puma docudrama. I loved it. Not 100% factual, but I think it gets the high points just right. And I agree with that. Robert says, Christopher and Kartik, I wonder when or if we will next see any football. There will probably be nobody in the stands until there is a vaccine. That will be very hard on the leagues that depend on gate receipts. That may be next year. And Major League Soccer would be one of those ones that really depends on gate receipts big time. And it could be next year before they start playing again.
This is the big question. Look, we hear you mentioned earlier in the show that there's this kind of discussion about MLS and are they better positioned than anyone else? And we really don't know. The MLS fans, or this particularly the ones that are really patrol Twitter and any critique of MLS they push back on, will tell you that there is nothing wrong. They're better positioned than any other league out there. But then they will be saying, well, we need to restart. And they will also talk about closed doors as being kind of a problem. So I think that they're probably in some trouble because not of where they are financially on May 1st right now, but where they are going to be November 1st. Mm-hmm. If there's no, they're more dependent on match day revenue than other first divisions in Europe and big leagues in this country. So maybe they just scrub the season then.
Yeah, plus the other thing, though, too, say, like, magically that MLS says, okay, beginning November 1st, we're going to start, fans can go to games. And now, all of a sudden, the gates are open, come on back. What percentage of people are going to go back? Is it going to be 50% of the people that are going to go, and the other 50% say, no thanks, I'll wait till next year until the vaccine's ready? I mean, it's going to take a time. It's going to have a match. Everything from concerts to, I mean, any public gatherings like July 4th, fireworks. So anything a public gathering is going to take a major hit because it's going to take time for people to get over the fear factor and to feel safe going into environments where there's large numbers of people in a closed environment and not have to worry about that. So the long-term effects on attendance, this could take 5 years to get back to where it was before, maybe even longer. So Major League Soccer now more than ever needs that 2022 TV deal to be as big as ever. Really, they're not going to do it, but to blow it up and say, okay, US Soccer on the men's side and women's side, you guys are on your own. Go ahead and run with that. Major League Soccer, we're going to try to get this TV deal to be as big as ever, and then that money goes right back to the clubs rather than being split with US Soccer, both on the men's and women's side. But yeah, I don't see a positive future for attendance for any sports in this country, at least for the next 5 years.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting because the people who are pushing for the resumptions will also acknowledge there will be a certain percentage of people who do not feel comfortable going back into these sort of settings with mass crowds. Now, they think it's going to be more like 5%. I'm thinking it's going to be more than that. Again, that's anecdotal, just from people I talk to. When I talk to my circle of people, hey, would you go back to a concert right now or to a sporting event or going to a crowded movie theater, not the movie theater where there are two people but some new premiere, the answer is almost like 75% no. Maybe that's just my circle, but I think it's kind of naive to think, at least based on my own experience, that it's only going to be 5 to 7% of the crowds that drop off. That if you were getting 20,000 before, you'll get 18,000 or 19,000 now. I just don't think that's realistic for a few years, maybe even. Right. Definitely this year. Definitely in 2020.
And lastly, Raymond Orozco says, what is the future of American soccer? I think the fundamental question MLS fans really need to ask themselves about the future of this league is this. Do we really want to look like Europe, which is extremely top-heavy, and the smaller teams are just happy to participate in the top league, or be content with a more competitive, balanced league, but the quality suffers from it? And that's the age-old question for Major League Soccer, is that I don't think they can compete with the transfer markets, with the high spenders. But the one thing that they are missing is those power clubs, those Manchester Uniteds, those Liverpools, those Chelseas, those clubs that are powerhouses that every year seem to be always attracting tons of new fans, doing everything right, buying all the big players. That at the end of the day is more successful, I think, for television than it is having parity. Parity sometimes is quite boring, and that's my take on that. All right, well, we want you to have your say. You can always reach us via email through web at worldsoccertalk.com, as well as facebook.com/worldsoccertalk, and on Twitter at worldsoccertalk. Plus, of course, you can always post your comments on worldsoccertalk.com. And thank you for listening. You can get a new episode of the World Soccer Talk podcast every Thursday across all of the different podcast players, as well as Google Home, Alexa, and YouTube, etc. And if you like the show, share it with your friends on social media and give us a review on iTunes. And Kartik, heading into another weekend of no live soccer, although I think NBC is going to be showing Manchester City against QPR game, I think, on NBC on Saturday. We'll have the full schedule at worldsoccertalk.com for all the weekend games. They're going to be shown on demand and live as in replays of classic matches. But what are your plans for the weekend, and what should the listeners do?
Well, I'm going to check that out because that's the Peter Drury and Craig Burley call of the Manchester City QPR, which we have not gotten in this country before. And as a big Craig Burley fan, I'm really looking forward to it. You should enjoy your football.